The laugh was a short, ugly sound that cut through the clatter of silverware on my graduation day. Supply chain management. My dad, Frank, didn't even look at me, instead addressing my brother Mike as if I were a ghost at the table. You spent 4 years and a small fortune to learn how to... What? Follow a box from a warehouse to a doorstep. My fork, which had been halfway to my mouth with a piece of the expensive steak my mom had insisted on for this celebration, felt suddenly heavy as a brick. The perfectly cooked meat, which I had been looking forward to all week, now looked like a lump of cold ash on my plate. This was supposed to be my night, a culmination of all the late nights in the library, the sacrificed weekends, the constant pressure to prove myself. The dining room, filled with the warm light from the chandelier and the faces of my extended family, should have felt celebratory. Instead, a cold dread pooled in my stomach. The smile I had been wearing all evening felt frozen and brittle on my face, a mask that was about to shatter. I slowly lowered my fork back to the plate, the gentle clink it made sounding like a gunshot in the sudden waiting silence that had fallen after my father's pronouncement. I could feel my mother's anxious gaze from the other end of the table, but she said nothing. She never did. The weight of his dismissal pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I had worked so hard for this moment, for this degree, and with one sentence, he had reduced it to nothing. His words echoed in the quiet room, each one a small, sharp knife twisting in my chest. Now, Mike here, Dad continued, completely oblivious to the tension he had created, or more likely, completely reveling in it. He clapped my brother on the back with a force that made Mike jolt forward slightly. Business finance. That's the backbone of any real company. Real, tangible skills. Numbers you can touch. Profits you can count. That's what built this family's security. Mike had the decency to look deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting between me and our father, but his lips remained sealed. He never spoke up. No one in my family ever did. It was easier for them to let the storm pass, to let my father's words hang in the air like a bad smell until everyone could politely pretend it wasn't there. The heat of a dozen stares from my aunts, uncles, and cousins pricked at my skin like tiny needles. I could feel their pity, their awkwardness, and in some cases, their silent agreement. My degree, the one I had aced, the one I had chosen with such specific, hopeful purpose, was being publicly shredded and used as a party trick to elevate my brother. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, on that piece of uneaten steak, using it as an anchor to stop myself from either screaming or crying. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing either. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, and I wished I could just disappear. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered at my soccer games, but in that moment, he felt like my biggest critic, my most formidable opponent in a battle I never wanted to fight. I took a slow, silent breath, counting to 5 in my head, forcing the tremor out of my hands before I placed them flat on the linen tablecloth. My voice, when it came, was dangerously quiet, a low and steady sound that cut through the muffled room. It's a bit more complex than that, Dad. He finally turned his full attention to me, a patronizing, almost bored smile plastered on his face. He leaned back in his chair, the patriarch holding court. Is it, Lauren? Enlighten us, then. What brilliant, earth-shattering insight does your degree? He paused, letting the word hang with a subtle sneer. Provide that 30 years of actually running my own company, of building something from nothing, doesn't? The entire table seemed to hold its breath. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. This was a familiar trap, one he had sprung on me countless times throughout my life, about everything from my choice of friends to my political views. He would ask a question not to learn, but to mock, to prove the superiority of his own lived experience over any theory I might have learned from a book. He had just set the snare, and he was waiting with that smug smile, for me to step right into it. I felt my cheeks burn, but I held his gaze. I knew whatever I said would be twisted, would be used as further evidence that I lived in a fantasy world, disconnected from the real struggles of business. The air was so thick with tension you could have cut it with one of the steak knives laid out so perfectly before us. That was the moment. The exact second the very last, frayed thread of my hope for his approval finally snapped. I looked across the table at my father, a man who had built Crestwood furniture from a one-car garage filled with sawdust and big dreams into a respected multi-location brand. And I saw a stranger. This man, with his salt and pepper hair and his strong, calloused hands, was incapable of seeing the value in his own daughter. He was so blinded by his own ego, so convinced of the infallibility of his practical knowledge, that he couldn't recognize the passion and the strategic mind standing right in front of him. The dream I had carried since I was a little girl, of one day working by his side, of bringing my new ideas to his beloved business, evaporated in that instant, leaving behind a cold, hollow space. The title of this story isn't just a catchy headline. It's a promise. This is the unvarnished truth of what happened later, when his world began to crumble under the weight of his own stubbornness, and he was finally forced to confront the value of the knowledge he had so carelessly mocked and dismissed at my graduation dinner. In that silence, I made a vow to myself. I would never seek his validation again. I would build my own success, so far removed from his world that his opinion would become irrelevant. A new, steely resolve settled in my soul, hardening me for the path ahead. My name is Lauren. For most of my 22 years, my identity was simply Frank's daughter. He was a local legend, the self-made man who started Crestwood Furniture with a single lathe and a relentless work ethic. I grew up immersed in the scent of fresh-cut pine and varnish, the soundtrack of my childhood, the whir of saws and the rhythmic pounding of hammers in his first small workshop. While other kids went to the park, I played on stacks of lumber, pretending the offcuts were my own miniature furniture empire. I didn't just want to work for him. I dreamed of it. I chose my major in supply chain management specifically for Crestwood. I saw the inefficiencies even as a teenager, the chaotic inventory, the reliance on a handful of expensive suppliers, the outdated shipping contracts. I wanted to modernize it, to streamline his operations and save him money, to be the strategic partner he never knew he needed. His mockery at that dinner table wasn't just a difference of opinion or a father's tough love. It felt like a profound and personal betrayal of a lifelong, deeply held dream I had nurtured just for him. It was as if he had taken the blueprint of my future and set it on fire right in front of me, watching it burn with a critical, dismissive eye. I didn't cry that night when I finally retreated to the silence of my bedroom. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, a cold, hard anger settled deep in my bones, a kind of furious clarity I had never experienced before. Then, that anger crystallized into a ruthless, strategic resolve. I would take my useless degree and I would make it my weapon. I polished my resume, practiced my interview answers until they were sharp and confident, and landed a competitive junior analyst position at Apex Logistics, a firm renowned in the industry for its ruthless efficiency and cutthroat corporate culture. It was the opposite of my dad's family-run, sentiment-driven business. I stopped talking about my work at family functions altogether. When Dad, in a rare moment of forced politeness, would ask, "How's that job going?" I'd offer a vague, "It's fine," or "It's keeping me busy," and immediately change the subject. I built a life he knew nothing about, a sleek apartment downtown, a circle of ambitious friends, a reputation for being sharp and unshakable at work. I became an island, entirely self-sufficient. The bridge that connected me to his world, to his approval, was officially closed for construction. Permanently. I was done trying to cross it. My life was now my own to design, free from the shadow of his judgment. A year passed in a blur of spreadsheets, late nights, and complex logistical puzzles. I was not just surviving at Apex. I was thriving. I was assigned to a high-stakes project for a major national retailer, and my analysis of their distribution network identified a massive redundancy in their Midwest shipping routes. My proposed consolidation saved the client over $2 million annually. The victory was quiet, professional, and entirely mine. There was no proud father to call, no family dinner to celebrate. The satisfaction was internal, a quiet hum of competence that grew louder with each success. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening, as I was meal prepping for the week, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. "Frank, Dad," flashed on the screen. My thumb instinctively hovered over the red decline button. We hadn't spoken beyond stiff pleasantries in months. A cold, grim curiosity won out over my better judgment. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered, "Lauren." His voice was gravelly, stripped of its usual bluster, and strained with a tension I recognized immediately. "Crisis. We need to talk. It's urgent." My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. This was it. The call I had somehow known would eventually come, the moment his pride would finally buckle under the weight of his failures. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't offer a greeting. He just launched straight into the heart of his emergency, his words tumbling out in a rushed, panicked stream. "My operations manager, Susan, she quit. Walked out yesterday with no notice. My entire shipping line is frozen. There's some mess with a port strike on the West Coast and a missed contract renewal I knew nothing about. Trucks are sitting idle, orders are piling up, and I'm getting hit with penalty clauses from 3 different retailers." He took a sharp, shaky breath. "I'm losing $10,000 a day, Lauren. Every single day." There was no please. "No, can you help me?" It was a stark, desperate statement of his crisis, delivered with the unshakable expectation that I would drop everything and come running. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it, the assumption that my expertise was his to commandeer the moment he found it convenient, made my knuckles turn white as I gripped the edge of my countertop. He still saw me as an extension of himself, a resource to be used, not a professional with her own career and demands. His sense of entitlement, even in the face of his own disaster, was absolutely staggering to me. I let the silence hang on the line for a beat too long enough for it to become heavy and uncomfortable. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own request, to sit in the awkwardness of his own desperation. "I'm sorry to hear that, Frank," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any warmth, the way I would speak to a difficult vendor. Using his first name was a deliberate, calculated risk, a signal that this was not a father-daughter conversation. I heard his sharp, startled intake of breath on the other end. "What does that have to do with me?" He sputtered, frustration edging his voice. "You studied this supply chain stuff, didn't you? I need you to look at it. Can't be that complicated. Shouldn't take you more than an afternoon to sort out." He still thought it was a child's puzzle, a simple game of connect the dots that he could hand to me to solve while he dealt with the real work. In that moment, I saw my opening with perfect, crystalline clarity. He needed me, but he was incapable of asking properly, of showing an ounce of respect for the very knowledge he was begging for. His condescension was my greatest weapon. "I'm a consultant, Frank," I said, my tone cool, professional, and utterly detached, the same voice I used with new clients at Apex. "My time is billable. My standard rate for emergency crisis management is $250 an hour. I require a signed contract before I can review any proprietary business data or offer any advice. I can have the documentation emailed to you within the hour." The silence on the other end of the phone was so profound, so absolute, I could hear the faint ticking of the analog clock on my wall and the hum of my laptop charger. It was the sound of his worldview shattering. I had just fundamentally changed the rules of our relationship. I was no longer the pleading daughter seeking validation. I was the expert, the authority, and he was just another desperate client begging for a lifeline. I could almost feel his shock radiating through the phone, the stunned disbelief that I would dare to treat him like a business transaction. The power dynamic had just irrevocably shifted in my favor, and we both knew it. He agreed. There was a long, defeated sigh, followed by a grumbled, "Fine. Send it." The contract was drafted, emailed, and signed by him that same night. There was no negotiation, no request for a family discount, not even a hint of one. The following Monday, I walked into the main headquarters of Crestwood Furniture not in the jeans and t-shirt I used to wear, but in a sharp, tailored black pantsuit and low heels. I carried a sleek leather portfolio and my company tablet, not the backpack from my college days. The employees, men and women who had known me since I was in pigtails, who had given me lollipops and let me play with the stamp machine, looked at me with a mixture of pity, confusion, and intense curiosity. They remembered the owner's daughter. They were about to meet the fixer from Apex Logistics, and the air was thick with unasked questions. I walked with a confidence I had earned, my posture straight, my gaze direct. I was not here as a daughter, I was here as a professional, and I demanded to be treated as one. The familiar scent of sawdust and wood stain was the same, but everything else felt completely different. I didn't go to his cluttered wood-paneled office first to receive my marching orders. I went straight to the factory floor, to the heart of the operation. For 3 days, I was a ghost, a silent observer moving through his business. I tracked inventory movement with a stopwatch. I analyzed shipping manifests and supplier invoices from the last 5 years. I interviewed the foremen, who were hesitant at first but soon opened up about the chronic delays and the old way of doing things that Frank insisted on. The inefficiencies I uncovered weren't just bad, they were catastrophic, a slow-motion train wreck I had predicted years ago. The reliance on a single, temperamental supplier for hardwood. The archaic warehouse layout that added hours to the picking and packing process. The house of cards, built on my father's stubborn, "we've always done it this way" mentality, was finally collapsing, and the wind had arrived in the form of a port strike and a resigned operations manager. Dad watched me from a distance, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, a permanent, skeptical scowl etched on his face. He wasn't hoping for a solution. He was waiting, almost eagerly, for me to fail, to prove that his way was the only way. His presence was a constant, silent challenge that I was determined to meet head-on. On the 4th day, I scheduled a meeting in his worn-out conference room. I invited my father, my brother Mike, who handled the company's books, and Carol, the sharp, long-time bookkeeper who knew where every single penny was buried. Dad slumped into his chair at the head of the table, his body language a fortress of defensiveness. He didn't wait for me to start. "So," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what's the magic, expensive solution, Lauren? Fire everyone. Move the whole operation to a new warehouse by the ocean." I gave him a thin, professional smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Frank. The solution is to stop the bleeding you've been ignoring for years. And it starts by addressing the most critical wound first, the one you caused with your refusal to diversify your supply chain." I could see the irritation flash in his eyes at my use of his name, at my calm demeanor. He was used to being the one in control, the one who asked the questions. Today, he was going to have to get used to listening to the answers, whether he liked them or not. I turned on the dusty projector and connected my tablet. The first slide illuminated the screen, a blown-up copy of a purchase order for Brazilian walnut. "You've been over-ordering from a single premium supplier, Timbercraft Incorporated, for the past 7 years, I stated, my voice calm and factual. "You're paying a consistent 42% markup over market average because you're loyal, and because you refuse to put the contract out for competitive bid." My dad scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Quality costs money, Lauren. You can't get wood like this from some cut-rate wholesaler." I clicked to the next slide, a detailed breakdown of product lines. "It does. But this quality walnut is being used primarily in your essentials line, your budget-friendly, flat-pack furniture. You're using a premium luxury material on a product designed to be affordable, wasting approximately $87,000 a year. On one material." I let that number hang in the air. I saw Carol, the bookkeeper, frantically scribbling notes, her brow furrowed. Mike was staring at the screen, his face pale. The sheer scale of the waste was finally, undeniably visible to everyone in the room except my father. A soft, shocked gasp escaped from Carol. Mike's eyes widened, his head swiveling between me and the spreadsheet on the screen. My dad's smug, defiant expression faltered, a crack appearing in his armor. I continued, click after methodical click, a relentless march through his failures. I showed him slides of obsolete inventory for discontinued product lines that he refused to clearance, taking up valuable warehouse space that cost him thousands in holding fees. I displayed a shipping contract with a major carrier that penalized Crestwood for slow loading times, a direct result of his own inefficient, outdated warehouse layout that he had designed himself 20 years prior. Each slide was a bullet, and I was hitting every single one of his sacred cows, his deeply held beliefs about how his business should be run. His practical experience, the very thing he had always held over my head, was being exposed as the root cause of his impending failure. The room grew colder with each revelation, the air thick with tension and the unspoken truth that I had been right all along. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to ignore. The final and most critical issue, I said, my voice dropping to a lower, more serious register, is your outright refusal to implement a modern enterprise resource planning system. I pulled up a horrifying spreadsheet, a patchwork of dozens of separate, manually updated files filled with disjointed data. Your operations manager, Susan, didn't just quit, Frank. She fled. She was trying to manage a multi-million-dollar operation with Excel spreadsheets from 2005. Data she had to manually collate from 5 different departments that don't communicate. It's unmanageable. It's a miracle she lasted as long as she did. The chaos, the disorganization, the sheer stress of trying to make this system work is why she left. And it's the precise reason you're here, in this room, with me, losing $10,000 a day. I looked directly at him. Your refusal to modernize, to listen to anyone who suggested a different way, has driven away your most valuable employees and brought your company to its knees. The words hung in the air, a final, devastating indictment of his leadership and his stubbornness. The room felt freezing. The color had completely drained from my father's face, leaving him a pale, shaken version of the confident man who had laughed at my degree. He looked old. I had systematically dismantled his life's work, his pride and joy, in 20 brutal, unassailable minutes. And I had done it all with the very knowledge, the useless textbook theories and analytical models he had mocked so thoroughly. He tried to rally, to find a foothold in the crumbling cliff face. This is all just theory. Slides and graphs. You don't understand the pressure of being on the floor, the real-world relationships with suppliers, I cut him off, my voice sharp and clear as glass. I understand profit and loss. I understand data-driven decision-making. And right now, Frank, based on every single metric on this screen, you are a master of loss. The finality in my voice silenced him completely. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the fight gone out of him. The great Frank Thompson had been bested by his own daughter, and the humiliation was written plainly across his ashen face. I thought I was done. I had presented the facts, exposed the rot, and proven my point beyond any reasonable doubt. I had my victory, cold and clean. But then, my brother Mike, who had been silent throughout the entire presentation, finally found his voice. Lauren. He began, his tone hesitant, almost pleading. Is there a way to fix this? A real, actionable plan? I looked at my father. He was staring blankly at the projector screen, now gone blue, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The bluster was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. And in that moment, I understood the true, most powerful form of revenge. It wasn't just in exposing the devastating problems. It was in possessing the complete, detailed, step-by-step solution to his salvation, the keys to the kingdom, and knowing that he would have to humble himself, to acknowledge my expertise, to even ask for it. The power had shifted completely, and it was now firmly in my hands. I held all the cards, and the next move was mine to make. My dad finally lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of something there. Not quite an apology, but a glimmer of desperate, undeniable hope. This was the moment. The moment he would finally say it. The moment he would look at me and see an equal, see a partner, see his daughter not as a disappointment but as his only way out. Lauren, He began, his voice rough and unsteady. We, the company. I stood up, cutting off his stumbling words. I closed my laptop with a soft, definitive click, disconnecting it from the projector. The room was plunged back into its normal, dim light. My full diagnostic report, which includes a comprehensive 50-page strategic turnaround plan, will be delivered to your email by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I stated, my voice devoid of all emotion. As per our signed contract, my final invoice for 40 hours of work will be attached. Have a good day, gentlemen. Carol. I didn't wait for a response. I had given him the diagnosis. The cure was in the report he would receive. Whether he chose to use it was now his problem, not mine. I turned and walked towards the door, leaving the silence and the ruin behind me. I walked out of the conference room without a backward glance. My heels clicked a steady rhythmic beat on the polished concrete floor, a sound of finality. I heard my father start to say my name again. Lauren, wait. But it was weak, distant, like a whisper from a dream I was already waking up from. I pushed open the heavy glass front door and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from Crestwood Furniture, from the place I had once thought I would inherit and lead one day. The revenge wasn't in the confrontation, in the yelling or the accusations. It was in the walking away. It was in the calm, professional detachment. I held the keys to his salvation, the complete, meticulously crafted plan that could not only save his company but make it thrive, and I was placing them just out of his immediate, desperate reach, behind a wall of professional protocol and emotional distance that he himself had taught me to build. I felt a strange emptiness, but also a profound sense of freedom. For the first time, I was completely in control of my own destiny. The invoice was paid without comment a week later. The bank transfer appeared in my account, a cold, hard number that represented the value of my time and my knowledge. The detailed 50-page report was sent as promised, landing in his inbox at 8:58 a.m. the next morning. I heard from my mother, during one of our careful weekly phone calls where we avoided the topic of Dad as much as possible, that he had implemented a few of the simplest, most surface-level suggestions. He finally clearance sold the old inventory and had a temp worker fix the most glaring errors in the shipping spreadsheet. It was enough to stop the most immediate financial bleeding, like applying a small band-aid to a gaping wound. But the core of my plan, the complete digital overhaul, the new ERP system, the supplier diversification strategy, the warehouse redesign, that report, I later learned, sat on his desk in a printed binder, untouched, gathering a fine layer of dust. His pride, it seemed, was a more valuable and protected asset to him than the future viability of the company he had spent his life building. He would rather let it die a slow death than admit that my useless degree had the answers he so desperately needed. His stubbornness was a force more powerful than his will to survive. 6 months later, based on the success of the project I had led during this same period, I received a promotion to senior consultant and a massive, 5-figure performance bonus at Apex Logistics. I didn't save it or invest it in something sensible. I went out and I bought myself a beautiful classic watch, an elegant timepiece with a sleek silver face and a black leather strap. It was expensive and utterly impractical, a pure luxury. Every time I glanced at it during a meeting or while checking the time, I was reminded of what it represented. My time, my knowledge, my expertise, they all had significant, quantifiable value. A value my father was never willing to acknowledge in me, and one he was now permanently unable to benefit from. The watch was a trophy, a quiet, constant reminder that I was building my own empire, separate from his. It was a symbol of my independence and my success, paid for with the money I earned using the very skills he had mocked. It was my personal monument to moving on and moving up. The call came on a gloomy, overcast afternoon. It was Mike. His voice was heavy, stripped of its usual light-heartedness. Lauren. Dad's selling Crestwood. He didn't say it with excitement or relief. He said it with a grim finality. It wasn't being sold as a thriving, going concern. It was a fire sale. The assets, the properties, the brand name, the remaining inventory, were being bought by a large, faceless conglomerate that planned to absorb it and shutter the name. Apex Auto, the competitor I had used as a case study in my presentation, had continued to grow, using the very digital and logistical strategies I had laid out in my ignored report. They had undercut Crestwood on price, speed, and customer convenience until there were simply no customers left. The house of cards, built on my father's stubbornness and his rejection of change, had finally collapsed. There was no dramatic explosion, no last-minute rescue. It was a quiet, grim, financial suffocation. The business that had been his entire identity was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. My father never called me to admit he was wrong. He never picked up the phone to ask for the full plan, to seek my guidance, to finally say, "You were right." He chose to let his life's work, the business that was his entire identity, be dismantled and sold off in pieces rather than humble himself before the daughter whose intellect and education he had scorned. His arrogance, in the end, was the anchor, and he had clung to it with both hands all the way to the bottom, dragging the legacy he cherished so much down with him. My victory was complete, and it was utterly, profoundly silent. There was no shouting from the rooftops, no feeling of schadenfreude. Just a quiet, sad acknowledgement that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt, and some people would rather drown than admit they need help to swim. I felt a pang of grief for the father I had once adored, but it was a grief for a ghost, for a man who no longer existed. The father I knew had been replaced by his own pride long ago. Last week, I was offered a partnership at Apex Logistics. It was a testament to my work, my resilience, and my strategic mind. As I signed the new contract, the pen feeling solid and sure in my hand, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The little girl who had trailed after her dad in the sawdust-filled garage, who had crafted elaborate business plans for him as a birthday present, who had craved his approval more than anything in the world, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who had built her own success from the ground up, with her own 2 hands and her own useless degree. The greatest revenge isn't about glorying in someone else's failure. It's about your own unshakable, undeniable, and hard-won success. My success, built on the very foundation he told me was worthless, is now my permanent address, my legacy. He is a ghost from a past life, a sad story from my youth. And I, standing in my corner office looking out at the city, have never been more present, more powerful, or more alive. The future was entirely mine, and it was brighter than I had ever imagined. I had not only proven him wrong, I had proven myself right, and that was the only validation I would ever need.